Hey, what's up, guys? Sorry if I'm over animating, but this is like my third time trying this, and I'm getting a little frustrated. So, The Shining, Stephen King, 36 years ago, wrote this book called The Shining. Here it is. Nationwide bestseller. Alright? Now, it came out. Stanley Kubrick was sitting there. He was like, what should I make a movie about next? Barry Lyndon wasn't all that. He knew that. I know he knew that. He was sitting there. Apparently, the legend goes, he was throwing books against the wall. He would start reading a book, be like, fuck this shit, throw it against the wall. Eventually, his secretary didn't hear anything for a while. Walked in the room. What's he reading? The Shining. So he made a movie. 1980 movie comes out. People liked it. I'm going to say probably. It did okay at the box office and whatever. But there was also a group of people, including Stephen King, who didn't like it very much. Stephen King has long said, recent AMA in regards to Under the Dome on Reddit, he said, nah, that movie's not very good. I don't like it. I'm thinking part of the reason behind that might just be it focuses on incredibly different stuff. Like, the book is all about alcoholism and how it destroys this family. Stanley Kubrick's movie has some of that stuff, but it's more just kind of like weird, isolated hotel, cabin fever, crazy guy goes crazier. Like, it's kind of doing its own just mood exercise thing, and it doesn't really dwell on that stuff as much as Stephen King would like. So, 17 years after the Kubrick movie came out, Stephen King was like, I know. I'm going to put my name on this miniseries, write a teleplay for it. We're going to make this miniseries, and it's going to be my vision, but it's going to be like a video production thing, like a TV show. 4.5 hours, Steven Weber's in it, Rebecca De Mornay, Melvin Van Peebles. I just watched that. It's not... it's different. It is more like the book than Kubrick's movie, but still doesn't quite get some of the stuff I liked so much about the book or the Kubrick movie. Like, it just... whatever. Okay, main differences. Dick Hallorann lives in both the book and in the miniseries. He dies in the Kubrick movie, which I think is meant to kind of establish, like, yo, Jack is serious, alright? You can't have a psychotic murderer in your thing who never successfully murders anybody. That makes the final act just tension-free and stupid, because you have, like, a bumbling idiot as your antagonist. That doesn't work. First thing Dick experiences, boom, axe in the gut. Scatman Crothers is gone. So, that's a big difference. I totally get why Kubrick did that, but on the other hand, it's kind of nice to see that dude travel across the country not for nothing, and he actually succeeds and actually becomes kind of a guiding influence in Danny's life after that point. Like, I could see that stuff leading up to Dr. Sleep in a way that makes a lot of sense. Like, at the end of the miniseries, they show him at, like, the college graduation. So it's like, oh, okay, 10 years after the events of the Overlook, he's still there. He's still helping Danny out. They're buddies. That's cool. Dick Hallorann, awesome guy. But, yeah, he doesn't just get ganked. Also in the book, they make it clear that he knows something bad could happen. Like, he writes out a will before he leaves for Colorado, because he's like, I don't think I'm coming back from this, man. This is pretty serious, which made a pretty good sense of dread around everything that dude was doing. So I like that part of the book. The Kubrick movie kind of maybe underserves some of that character stuff with Dick, but at the same time, I do like how the movie paces out his journey west over the course of quite a while, so you get the sense, like, no, he's slowly coming over here, but there's some bad stuff going on at the hotel. The book kind of does that too. They kind of pace out, like, gives you little updates on what Dick's progress is in terms of getting back to the Overlook. The miniseries just kind of rushes all that stuff in the final episode. They're just like, Melvin Van Peebles is hanging out at this restaurant. Oh no, Danny's communicating with me, I gotta go. Runs outside, runs to his car, drives to the airport, gets a plane ticket. Oh, I missed a flight. Alright, fade out, fade back. He gets on the flight, he's there. Don't even show him having the hassle with, like, getting the snowmobile or any of that stuff. Just boom, right there. Like, in the book, there's this whole long, protracted thing where he's, like, trying to drive through the most treacherous weather ever. A couple dudes help him out. He manages to borrow a snowmobile, like, kind of an off chance. Like, he knows a guy who knows a guy. Like, it's a more protracted process to get Dick to the Overlook, whereas the miniseries kind of downplays all that stuff. It's just, no, he just shows up at the right time. It's awesome. So yeah, another kind of strike against the miniseries. I'm trying to think if there's anything the miniseries actually does better than the other two. I'm going to say no. Like, nothing. Which, sorry to Steven Weber and everyone involved, but it is kind of painful to watch at times. Like, There's the topiary animals that are in both the book and the miniseries, but the way the book describes it, you kind of get the sense like it's almost just an indicator of people going crazy. Like, it's like, did I see that move? Is that moving? I don't know. Whereas in the miniseries, it's like, no, there's CG green animals coming at you, and it's late 90s TV CG. It's pretty bad. That stuff. Like, the way they introduce them, it's kind of like the angels in Doctor Who. If you watch the Blink episode, like, it's like, they're, you look at the angel, look away, look back, and it's like right up in your face, like that kind of kind of thing. Like, there's some editing tricks like that when they first introduced them in the miniseries, which I was like, okay, good, that's the correct way to handle it. But then eventually, no, there's a shot with Danny sitting, playing, and then behind him are bad CG coming up on him. Not cool. The book also has a sequence involving the topiary animals that actually works, though. Like, Danny crawls into this, like, underground culvert or something, and he's, like, it's just very claustrophobic. Like, it was, like, a genuine, like, little, like, claustrophobia moment for me while I was reading it, and I thought that was great. That is, like, and that was a unexpected little sequence because it's not in the movie. So, like, my basis for this whole story is the Stanley Kubrick movie. It was the first interpretation of this story I saw. Man, I'm trying to think when I first watched, like, a decade ago or something. Like, and, the Simpsons parody and all this stuff. Like, there's a lot of pop culture background info on Stanley Kubrick's The Shining that had me kind of predisposed towards that stuff. But I was genuinely impressed with a lot of stuff the book does, like, pulls off. Like, they kind of, just because of the nature of the medium, you can kind of jump from each character's head and get, like, a really good, clear sense of their thoughts or whatever. And, Danny becomes a more fleshed out character as a result of that. The miniseries tries to kind of do that by making him more articulate. Like, he's a slightly older kid. He's 7 in the miniseries as opposed to 5. And he is just a talkative little dude. Like, he's just saying stuff. And that just kind of made him one of those irritating, wise beyond his years kind of guys. Like, I just was not into it. Like, the Kubrick movie, like, Danny in that is very sullen and withdrawn, which kind of worked for me. Like, that just seemed like an authentic 5-year-old to me. Like, maybe it was just, like, I was a little quiet as a kid, but, like, that resonated with me. I was like, no, yeah, what Danny is doing here, that makes sense. Like, if I was in a creepy hotel, I would not be, like, talking to the apparitions or whatever. I would just be kind of, like, quivering and, like, not really sure of what's going on. The miniseries, I feel, kind of mishandled all that stuff. In the book, they have the benefit of, like, no, Danny doesn't need to be talking to anybody because there's no camera here or anything, so you just get the sense that he is just thinking all this stuff, and that's like, yeah, that's legit. Like, kids can be thoughtful. That works for me. But, okay, I brought up the ending of the miniseries already, but that kind of highlights another key difference. Tony, in the movie, there's a whole, like, hello, Mrs. Torrance, Red Rob, all that great stuff. This stuff, that's great stuff, because Tony's never on screen. You don't know if Danny's just crazy or what he's experiencing, but you get the sense something weird's going on. In the miniseries, they decide to present Tony as, like, a teenage punk, like, just a teenage kid floating around. Like, it's just, like, look over there and, oh, it's a teenager floating around in the air, and he's saying slightly disturbing things, like he's got a literal road sign with a skull and crossbones on it. Oh, isn't that scary? And it was just like, what are you guys, why are you doing that? Like, for the, it's a 4.5 hour thing. For 4 hours, I was just kind of like, wow, this is a terrible way of presenting this. Why did they do this? The reason they did it is revealed in the end. Tony is Danny. Tony is future Danny. They reveal his middle name is it's Daniel Anthony Torrance, and they show him at graduation, and it is the same actor. Like, it is him. So he was somehow sending himself, like, warnings from the future or whatever. So that's a way to do it, I guess, but that payoff was not worth the corny, dumb scenes that preceded that. The way the book describes it, though, I actually liked, which had me kind of anticipating, like, okay, well, if this is going to be a visual depiction of what the book was all about, they could actually handle this really well. The way I read it was, whenever Tony is seen, he's, like, far away. Like, you look in your mirror, and then just around the corner, you see a little hint of, like, someone's there, and then you communicate with it. Or, like, Danny is sitting in his sandbox or something, looks over his shoulder, like, a block away behind a house, like, just peeking out of the corner. There's, like, something there. and you're hearing thoughts from it or whatever. So he's like communicating with it that way. That was okay for me. Like that was like, oh, it's a little weird. I don't know. Like it's like you get a little stalkery vibe. Like there's like something invisible following you around the neighborhood or something. Like that worked for me. The way the miniseries handled it, not into it. There's a couple minor differences. I mean, like I already brought up the hedge animals. Obviously, in the movie, there's no hedge animals. It's the maze, which again was kind of just a more relatable thing to me. I've been in mazes. I've been in mazes before. I've never seen a hedge animal. No, I have. They're just not scary. It's just a hedge animal. What's the worst it's going to do? In the book, even they try to describe like the hedge animals as like attacking people, but it's just like, yeah, you're going to get scratched up by some branches. I mean, that's kind of lame, but it's not the end of the world. Like it's not that big a deal. Like they're just not very threatening. It's not a very threatening thing. Like I liked it more as like that kind of, am I perceiving reality correctly? Am I losing my mind kind of indicator, like a stress test, as opposed to actually, no, they're supposed to be monsters that are trying to hunt you. Like the miniseries really leans hard on those as being like, oh, watch out, the hedge animals are gonna get you. It's not very scary. It's just not very scary. Same with like there's a bit with the fire hose, like in the book, Danny like sees a fire hose lying on the floor, and he's like, I don't think that was there before. I should just jump over it, but then he's like too scared to jump over it and like leaves. You know, like it's like he has the sense that something weird is going on, but you don't literally see a fire hose jump around like in the miniseries, which totally undercuts anything that was at all unnerving about that stuff in the first place. So yeah, like the miniseries makes like stuff that's best imagined real, whereas Kubrick kind of wisely cut out a lot of those bits where it's just like his rationale, I believe, was just like, we don't have the special effects technology for this. Let's just not do that. Like, good call. I guess also, man, there's stuff in the movie that you think of when you think of The Shining now. Specifically, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Like, Jack slowly losing his mind and like, well, no, like pretty quickly losing his mind, right? And just typing. There is none of that, all right? There's none of that. Like in the book or the miniseries, that scene is just a pure Kubrick original. So that was definitely a bit of a strike against the other two. Like it's just like, oh man, like that is so iconic now. Good job, Stanley Kubrick, really. But yeah, I'm trying to think what are like the other main points of departure between the three. I mean, you definitely get a better like internal sense of each of the characters and stuff, and I guess the relationship dynamics are just handled completely differently. Like, in the book and the miniseries, they have, like, a big emphasis on, like, okay, they were a working family. Like, they were functioning fine as a family. But then alcoholism came up and, like, all this, you know, Jack going to AA meetings, like, Jack trying to work through this stuff. Like, he has Excedrin or something, like, medication that he's taking to kind of keep the shakes down or whatever. Other than, like, the conversation with Lloyd, the bartender in the movie, like, the alcohol thing is kind of downplayed a little bit. Maybe, like, it's just not the primary focus of, like, oh, you know, this very relatable, practical thing is causing this. It's more like, no, Jack was crazy. Like, Jack was looking for an excuse to do something crazy, and this weird hotel is the perfect setting for a psychopath to kind of blossom or whatever. And, yeah, and I do really like Jack Nicholson's performance as well. Like, I will say, like, just some really memorable lines that are just delivered perfectly, that etched in the public consciousness about horror movies or whatever. Like, there's some great stuff. Like, Steven Weber, like, it's definitely more of, like, a sad, melodramatic kind of thing, which, you know, I can't really fault him necessarily for a lot of it. Like, you just were served a less interestingly written character. But yeah, okay, this brings me to a lot of the stuff Jack spends time doing in both the book and the miniseries is investigating the past of the hotel. They, like, really want to spell out for you a lot of the things that happened in the history of the Overlook. Whereas I felt the Kubrick movie just kind of showed and didn't tell. You know, like, it's just like, oh, there's these people in these weird costumes. You know, like, what's going on? But you don't know what's going on. You just know there's a dude in a weird dog suit, and it's weird. You know? Whereas in the miniseries and the book, they're kind of like, no, man, this is like, this hotel was a big party spot in, like, the 30s and 40s. So a lot of movie stars came here. There were a lot of big parties, New Year's Eve bashes and all this stuff. And those were costumes from this masked ball or whatever. And, like, they really make that clear. They also just, like, newspaper articles about different murders that were committed there, gang hits and all this, like, gangland hits, suicides. Like, they run down a list of, like, all the stuff that happened. And then when you see the ghosts that are related to those events later, you're just like, oh, okay, this is the lady who committed suicide because of this, or whatever. Like, there's less mystery behind it, which I don't know why you'd want that, but I guess it's like, you know, something to kind of occupy Jack's mind and have, like, this weird, elaborate history of, like, nightmare stuff happening there. In the movie, they kind of run down, like, okay, this was built on an Indian burial ground, there's, like, all this stuff. Like, the manager really runs down, like, this bizarre history, and then everyone kind of just takes it in stride and moves on, and then, you know, no, that's bad. Like, there's, like, a weird evil here. But, like, again, because it's just kind of, like, bluntly stated, and then they just move past it to showing you weird stuff happening, I got so much more caught up in the way the movie's atmosphere worked. Whereas the miniseries just kind of just, like, I guess part of the problem there is, like, you don't get the sense of scope that Kubrick brings to the hotel. Like, you don't get the sense that it's, like, a giant ballroom or anything. It all seems very, like, TV sets, you know, like, very small. Like, it just didn't have the scale that you'd need to be, like, that kind of, like, you know, the very particular haunting effect of being, like, a big, empty building. You don't ever get that in the miniseries. Like, it's just, like, so much of it is just in small rooms. Like, you know, even the big, like, ballroom where the stuff happens, like, it's very close-ups, like, him sitting very close to the bar, like, you don't get that, like, Jack entering this giant labyrinthian ballroom and then walking across this big room to the bar, then we hang out in the bar a bit, but you still get the sense, like, no, this is, like, a vast space he's in, and he's alone, which is kind of unfortunate that they wouldn't depict it that way, because they actually talk about stuff like that in here, like, there's a bit early on where they eat dinner in one of the big giant rooms and then just feel creeped out by it. Because it's just like, this is just weird. Like, we're in a giant empty banquet hall and it's just us eating our soup or whatever here. Like, this is just too... It's something vaguely unsettling about it. So then they just start eating in the kitchen. You know, like that, they touch on that weird unnerving stuff. Like, you get the sense, like, Kubrick reading it picked up on those things, and we're like, okay, this is my highlight reel of, like, stuff I relate to as weird things, so I'm gonna focus on that stuff. Whereas, like, Stephen King was kind of explaining, like, no, what about the hedge animals? Or what about, you know, I don't know, like, alcoholism and, like, the torment inside this man's mind or whatever. Like, it's just like, no, I don't care about that. Like, there's just very different criteria as to what they want to focus on, so... But yeah, like, the core stuff is still the same. Like, it's just like, there's a weird hotel, the family's isolated there and removed, there's only 3 of them, there's, like, this bizarre history, but the way they kind of show you that stuff is, like, the devil's in the details or whatever, right? And I do really like that Kubrick film. You know, Room 237 is worth checking out if you're a fan of the movie. Like, they kind of break down some, like, I'm not saying I relate to those people's interpretations of it, but there's just some amazing insight into, like, how obsessed people can become with something presented like that. Like, it's just like, the less you say explicitly, the more people will read into it. And, like, Kubrick does that very perfectly. Like, just kind of, like, hints at some weird stuff, and then people went into the most insane directions with it, and it's really, it's an entertaining movie. Like, a lot of people have seen The Shining, so I assume if you've seen it, you will get something out of Room 237, but it's an interesting watch. I cannot say that the miniseries is an interesting watch, though. I don't know who that is for at this point. Like, I guess unless you want to kind of see all the versions of the story, and, like, there's some bonus stuff that happens. Like, that ending is different. I'm wondering if that's kind of Stephen King approved, like, in his mind for going forward with Dr. Sleep stuff. Like, that decade of history between Halloran and Danny, like, is that gonna, like, are we gonna get more Dick Halloran kind of stuff, like references to what his impact was? I'm kind of curious about that. The end of the miniseries, though, it does also kind of allude to, like, hey, someone is going to rebuild the Overlook. Like, someone's planning to rebuild it. I don't know if they're going to go in that direction at all. Like, I don't really think you need to have Danny return to the Overlook Hotel 36 years later. That would be a little easy. Like, I don't view the Overlook as really the most interesting thing. Like, it was more just the scenario of being, you're going to be alone for months. Like, that was the cool aspect of it, not so much the actual history of that building and, like, the gangsters and movie stars and stuff that were there. Not as interesting as some may, like, you know, maybe Stephen King thinks it was. But it was, you know, good backdrop for a cool thing, but I don't know. I don't think you really need to go back there specifically to make a sequel to that. I guess, yeah, there's also the boiler stuff. That's the thing. Yeah, the hotel blows up in both the book and the miniseries. Like at the end of the Kubrick film, they just leave. Like Dick ends up being sort of a hero in all of them because he brings the snowmobile there so they can actually get out of there. But yeah, explicitly at the end of the other two, the hotel boiler has no safety valve and just blows up. They again just kind of ignore that in the Kubrick movie. Like yeah, you don't get lots of Jack actually caretaking. It's more just like he is there writing, which weirdly, like there's more of Jack sitting in front of his typewriter, like struggling over writer's block in the movie than there is in the book or the miniseries, despite how often they mention the play. You know, like, oh, he's trying to finish this play. You get, like, no scenes of him actually doing that because he pretty quickly just abandons that in favor of thinking about writing this book. But even then, just thinking about it. Like, you don't even get him writing a draft of this history of the hotel or anything. You get very little Jack doing that kind of stuff, which is kind of too bad. And then, you know, just on top of it, like, less interesting angles, like, less charismatic performances in the miniseries, like... There's just not a lot going on. There's just not a lot going on there. It is hard to recommend a 4.5-hour undertaking like that unless you really just want the complete picture of every time anyone has ever taken a crack at telling the story of The Shining, and maybe get some insight into what, you know, Stephen King's perception of what that story is supposed to be about versus Stanley Kubrick's was or whatever. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, like the book and the Kubrick movie are almost on equal footing, just with very different emphases, you know? Emphasize? That's not a word. Like, they both have very interesting moments that are unique to themselves, right? And, you know, you have to give some credit to the book. Like, without the book, like, a lot of the seeds of good stuff that comes out in the Kubrick movie wouldn't even exist. So those are fine. I'm still anticipating reading Dr. Sleep. Like, I'm curious about where Danny Torrance would have gone in Stephen King's mind and all that. Like, it's still an interesting character there. But yeah, the miniseries you can pretty much just completely dismiss entirely. Like, there is pretty much no moment in there that made that all make sense. Like, it's like way more overtly creepy with like supernatural stuff, like doors closing and stuff sliding around and weird, you know, sounds, and the music's very like creepy choir kind of stuff. Like, there's just not a lot to say about the miniseries in a positive light. Like, I was thinking, like, maybe there's someone out there who's, like, a really big Wings fan, who's like, I want to see Steven Weber freak out. Sure, that happens in here. If you're, like, a fan of any of these actors, like, Melvin Van Peebles, actually, he does a pretty good performance. Like, I mean, Scatman Crothers and him have kind of different takes on the character, and they get to do slightly different stuff, but maybe you're a little underserved on that then, because you don't get a lot of Dick Halloran doing stuff in this. Like, episode 2, completely not there. Episode 3, pretty rushed. So even if you're a big Melvin Van Peebles completionist, if that's a guy, if you exist out there, have fun, I guess. But there's not a lot there for you. Yeah, I guess the final thing on that, like, part of the problem is just it is a TV movie, so the book is pretty foul-mouthed. You know, like just a lot of angry drunk Jack, or wanting to be drunk Jack, cursing it up. The movie has a fair amount of just like angry stuff. The TV movie can't do that. They just can't